The story of the Knights Templar often arrives to us in fragments. White mantles marked by red crosses, whispered accusations of heresy, the sudden blaze of pyres at dawn. We are told they were warriors of the Crusades, guardians of pilgrims, servants of Rome. Yet behind the chronicles there lingers a silence, a span of years unaccounted for, as though history itself paused to take a breath. What did those 9 knights truly find when they vanished beneath the Temple Mount? Was it only rubble and cisterns, or scrolls bearing wisdom older than Christendom? Did they emerge as soldiers blessed by faith, or as custodians of a covenant without a name, one carried not in relics but in silence, in ratios, in symbols traced upon stone? This journey will walk through that silence, through the caverns of Jerusalem, through cathedrals that hum with hidden codes, through the whispers of Rome, and into the misty forests where nameless riders vanish from record. We will not decide what is certain, but we will linger with the questions that remain. You are listening to Serene Myths. If you wish to join these wanderings more often, you may like or subscribe or simply leave a comment with the place and hour where you find yourself now as you drift with the story. And so, with bells tolling faintly in the distance, we step softly into the shadows of Jerusalem, where 9 knights once vanished into silence. When the First Crusade spilled into Jerusalem in 1099, the city had already been layered with centuries of conquest, ruin, and prayer. The stones of the old Temple Mount still bore the weight of countless empires: Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs. Each new faith and ruler left shadows upon those blocks of limestone, and yet, within the silence of that plateau, something older seemed to linger. A generation after the Crusaders claimed the city, 9 men, armoured in steel but bound by vow, chose not to continue the war of swords and banners. Instead, they vanished into a life of quiet mystery, quartered in what remained of Solomon's temple. These 9 were led by Hugues de Payan, a knight of Champagne. History records him as solemn, deliberate, not one to spill words unnecessarily. His companions, drawn from noble families of France and Flanders, swore to live not as wandering mercenaries but as defenders of pilgrims along the roads. Yet curiously, for the first 9 years of their existence, these so-called poor fellow soldiers of Christ did not fight in any open battle. No chronicler reports their charge upon the battlefield. Instead, the records fall into silence, a curious blank, as if the earth itself had swallowed them. What were they doing all that time beneath the shadow of the mount? Mainstream historians acknowledge the peculiarity. The Templars were granted quarters directly upon the temple platform, above a network of tunnels and foundations. Sources note that Baldwin II, the Latin king of Jerusalem, offered them this residence around 1119. Such a gift was extraordinary, for the Temple Mount was sacred and contested. Why entrust a handful of knights with its most sensitive ground? The answer, some argue, is simple logistics. There was space, and the king had few lodgings to spare, but others, peering into the 9 silent years, whisper that these knights were not simply guarding pilgrims, but digging, excavating the earth like miners, seeking something that predated both Rome and Christ. Imagine them in torchlight, helmets set aside, hands raw not from sword hilts, but from picks and shovels. The air underground must have been close, tasting of lime and dust. Each strike of iron against stone echoed like a muffled bell, tolling within caverns forgotten. Day after day, while the world above bustled with prayers and markets, Below the mount, the knights traced corridors where silence clung like cobweb. They were soldiers, yet in those hours they resembled monks of the earth, copying patterns in dust rather than manuscripts on vellum. One story, told much later, describes how they uncovered not treasure chests but fragments of ancient writing. Scrolls brittle with age, etched with diagrams of stars and measures of angles. Some believed these were remnants of Solomon's architects, blueprints of sacred proportion, hints of a divine geometry. Others speculated the texts belonged to Essenes, an ascetic sect said to guard wisdom in desert caves. The truth is debated. No scrolls survive today that can be verified as their find. Yet the persistence of the tale is telling. The Templars' silence left room for imagination to take root like ivy. A quirky note lingers in one medieval chronicle, though rarely cited. It claims the knights, lacking tools, once borrowed the plumb lines and carpentry gear of local builders repairing walls nearby. The chronicler mocks them gently, calling them masons in armor. Such a detail, though playful, paints a picture far more vivid than legends of golden relics. The knights crouching in dust, measuring depth with twine weighted by lead, appear more human, more fallible, yet also more dedicated. What warrior, after all, chooses thread and stone over blade and shield, unless bound by conviction deeper than steel? Some scholars argue the whole narrative of excavation is later invention, a romantic embroidery woven centuries afterward. They remind us that no contemporary record explicitly says the knights dug beneath the mount. What we do know with certainty is that for nearly a decade they did not participate in military campaigns, and that absence cries for explanation. Silence itself becomes evidence, a kind of shadow script upon history, and in that silence myths find fertile soil. Whether real or imagined, the notion that these 9 knights pursued a covenant of knowledge rather than a treasure chest changes how we see them. Instead of fortune seekers, they become custodians of memory, heirs to a pact, written not on parchment, but into the very stone beneath Jerusalem. The idea of a covenant without a name, neither wholly Jewish nor wholly Christian, but universal in its suggestion of harmony, lingers in the half-light of history. It is debated, doubted, and yet it refuses to vanish. Perhaps that is why, across centuries, storytellers return to those 9 years like moths circling a single, unseen flame. The air of mystery suited the Templars well. When they finally emerged from obscurity, they carried with them not just the sheen of discipline, but the aura of guardianship. They were men who had kept a secret, and that aura drew both admiration and suspicion. People whispered that they had touched the Ark itself, or that they had walked in chambers where angels once stepped. Others said they merely found cisterns and rubble. Between those two poles stretches the entire history of their myth, half dust, half light, always just beyond reach. Close your eyes, and you may hear the faint chime of metal tools striking stone, the echo blurring like bells in mist. You may see 9 figures bent in shadow, their torches guttering, faces streaked with soot, determined yet strangely hushed. They are soldiers who do not march, warriors who do not charge, knights who vanish into the earth itself. Above them, pilgrims sing hymns in the streets. Below, the earth keeps its breath, waiting to reveal or conceal what lies in its marrow. And when at last they emerge, with dust clinging to their mantles and silence sealed upon their lips, they carry nothing visible in their hands. Yet something intangible glows around them, as if the earth has entrusted them with a secret beyond parchment, beyond coin, beyond the reach of kings. That silence becomes their most enduring possession, heavier than gold, more dangerous than swords. The story lingers, unresolved, and from that unresolved space we pass onward. For the secret, whether carved in stone or carried in silence, does not end in the shafts beneath Jerusalem. It follows them, like the toll of a hidden bell, into the wide forests of Europe, where their order will grow roots. The torches burned low, their flames bending in the stale air. Beneath the Temple Mount, the passageways seemed less like tunnels and more like veins of the earth, arteries of dust and breath. The knights who wandered there did not stride like conquerors, but stooped like pilgrims, one hand on stone to steady themselves. Every sound was magnified. A cough rattled like thunder, a dropped pebble echoed as though the mountain itself were listening. It was here, in these subterranean hollows, that the 9 men passed much of their hidden years, drawing meaning from rubble and whisper, from the play of firelight upon carvings long forgotten. History acknowledges that the platform of the ancient temple held more than open courts. Underneath lay cisterns, storage chambers, and corridors cut into the bedrock by earlier civilizations. Roman engineers, Byzantine caretakers, and Islamic custodians each left their marks. Archaeologists in later centuries would map some of these hollows, confirming their scale and intricacy. But in the 12th century, to stumble into such darkness was to step into a riddle. The knights must have felt the walls breathe with the past, every slab a remnant of empires. For men raised in castles of timber and stone, these foundations seemed eternal, cut not by human hand, but by some order older than steel. One can picture them moving through dust that thickened in their throats, their armor set aside for rough tunics, their boots crusted with chalk. A chronicler once described the mount as hollow as a hive, and perhaps it was. They found sealed chambers, some choked with rubble, others half filled with stagnant water. In one, so the tale runs, they uncovered faint etchings that resembled constellations. The pattern, if it ever existed, was later lost, but the image persists. Knights crouched before star maps drawn not in ink, but in grooves upon limestone, tracing Orion's belt with calloused fingers while their torches sputtered. This is where mainstream fact intersects with speculation. Historians confirm that medieval holy sites often reoccupied foundations from far older cultures. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, not far from the Mount, stood upon layers of Roman quarry and pagan shrine. It would not have been unusual for the Temple Mount to conceal structures from earlier centuries, yet the leap from foundations to sacred geometry is more tenuous. No verified relics survive from these alleged discoveries, no parchment preserved with their dust. What survives is silence, and from silence, myth. Still, there is something oddly human in the smaller anecdotes, the quirky details that slipped into rumor. One story speaks of a slab so stubborn it defied their efforts for weeks. The knights gave it a nickname, calling it the mule, as if it were an animal too stubborn to move. They returned to it night after night, wedging their levers beneath, muttering like labourers rather than lords. At last the slab shifted, and beneath it they found not treasure, but an empty cavity, a tomb that held nothing except air, stale as centuries. Some claim the void itself was the sign, a deliberate hollow, as though absence could be more meaningful than presence. There are also whispers of wax tablets passed among them, sketches of strange spirals and labyrinth forms, doodled in tired hands by torchlight. These patterns, if they ever existed, could have been idle amusements of weary men like monks drawing beasts in the margins of Bibles. Yet others insisted the doodles were keys, fragments of some greater code left by Solomon's builders. The debate persists. Were these marks the idle play of imagination or the echo of a knowledge too subtle for parchment? One debated point divides scholars even now. Did the Templars find actual writings beneath the mount? Some argue yes, pointing to later traditions that connect the order with secret texts of wisdom, astronomy, alchemy, Kabbalah. Others dismiss it as myth, spun centuries later, noting that no document survives to prove it. Between these poles lies a middle ground. Perhaps the knights did find remnants, but fragments too broken to be preserved, shards of inscription whose meaning was more suggested than real. And in the half-light of their imagination, those fragments grew into a covenant of understanding. It is worth pausing here, in the dust and the hush, to consider how these men must have felt. They were trained for war, yet they found themselves in a silence deeper than battle. The air pressed close, heavy with centuries. Breathing was an act of communion. Each inhalation pulled in the dust of empires. Each exhalation gave back a thread of living presence. Perhaps in that rhythm they sensed the pulse of continuity, the breath of the past mingling with their own. They were knights, yes, but in those chambers they became monks of stone and air. There is a strange comfort in imagining them pausing to rest, leaning back against walls cold with condensation. One might have drawn a crude star upon the ground with the tip of his boot. Another, weary, might have hummed a psalm, the notes floating thin as smoke until swallowed by silence. In those moments, the quest ceased to be about what they might find, and became instead about how the place itself reshaped them. They went in as soldiers, they emerged as something else, cloaked in secrecy, charged with silence as though it were a weapon more potent than any blade. Some modern scholars suggest that all this talk of underground discovery was a later invention meant to glorify the order. They argue that the 9 years of apparent inactivity were simply the slow establishment of a new brotherhood, time spent gathering members, seeking patrons and shaping rules. This is plausible, and indeed, it may be the sober truth. Yet truth alone rarely stirs the imagination. And so the underground lingers, a metaphor if not a reality. The image of men descending into earth to uncover what lay beneath faith, beneath empire, beneath history itself. Close your eyes and let the scene unfold. The passageways breathe dust, torches sway, throwing shifting constellations of shadow across the stone. The air is heavy, yet alive with the murmur of unseen echoes. And the knights, 9 in number, move slowly, as though each step carries them deeper not only into the ground, but into time itself. The mule slab waits, the carved stars whisper, the hollow tomb exhales. Above, the bells of Jerusalem toll, faint but insistent, their sound slipping down through cracks to reach the ears of men who no longer know whether they dig for treasure, for covenant, or for truth. And when they climb back to the surface, blinking in daylight, their faces bear the mark of dust and mystery. They say little. They carry less. Yet something clings to them, like the smell of stone after rain, like the hush of corridors that never quite let go. It is not what they found that matters, but what they became in the searching, men of silence, guardians of questions. The shafts close behind them, but the echo of their breath remains. From dust and darkness, they bring not relics, but a new kind of vow, one that will ripple outward into cathedrals and crosses, into whispers that reach even to Rome. And from those dark corridors, the story moves forward, as though the breath of the past still guides their steps into a destiny unimagined. The silence of the Temple Mount was a silence that weighed more than steel. When the 9 knights finally emerged from their hidden years, their lips carried the hush of caverns, as if each word they spoke might fracture something fragile, something not yet ready for the light. People expected treasure, chests of coins or relics of dazzling power. Instead, what the knights bore was invisible, a covenant that could not be carried in hands but only in memory, in pattern, in the resonance of things unseen. It was a covenant without a name, yet it shaped the destiny of the Order more than any sword ever could. Mainstream chronicles tell us little. They confirm that after years of obscurity, the knights presented themselves anew to the world, their ranks blessed, their mission sanctified. Yet even those early records hint at something transformed. No longer merely poor soldiers, they seemed cloaked in purpose, as though the earth beneath Jerusalem had whispered a charter into their very marrow. Historians speak cautiously, noting that the first Templar rule emphasized poverty, obedience, and defense of pilgrims. But woven through those words is an undertone of discipline, rare for a group so small. It is as though they were bound not only by vow, but by secret knowledge, an inward order, stronger than parchment. The covenant, if we may call it that, is not found in any single document. Rather, it is glimpsed in echoes, ratios embedded in churches, symbols drawn into seals, patterns hinted at in their liturgy. Some suggest it was the covenant of sacred proportion, the belief that harmony itself is divine law. The ancients had long imagined that numbers held the key to the cosmos, that to measure rightly was to pray in stone. Plato spoke of the music of the spheres, Pythagoras of number as essence. Could it be that beneath the mount, the knights stumbled upon fragments of this tradition, preserved across centuries, and that they carried it home, not as text, but as instinct? A curious anecdote, buried in a marginal note of a later chronicler, tells of a knight who sketched a labyrinth in wax during prayer, passing the tablet along the line of his brothers. The labyrinth had no exit, only spirals folding inward. To some it was nothing more than idle doodling. To others it was symbol, the inward journey of the soul, the secret path winding toward divine union. Perhaps that simple tablet was the covenant made visible for a moment, then lost again in the folds of time. The debated heart of the matter is this: was there truly a covenant, a pact of knowledge drawn from Solomon's temple, or was it later myth, spun by generations hungry for mystery? Some scholars dismiss it as legend, pointing out that no contemporary charter names such a treasure. They argue that the Order's power lay not in hidden wisdom, but in worldly support, in papal backing and noble patronage, and yet the absence of proof only fuels the imagination. Why the silence of those 9 years? Why the aura of secrecy that clung to the Order ever after? It is easier to believe they bore a hidden charge than to think they idled for nearly a decade beneath holy stone. There is also the whisper of an alternative, that the covenant was not a thing found, but a thing made. The knights themselves, shaped by their descent into earth, forged a pact of silence, a vow to guard what they had not yet fully understood. In this sense, the covenant was less discovery than invention, a living agreement to embody the mystery rather than reveal it. That idea explains much. The silence, the discipline, the way their identity seemed less like a charter and more like an aura. Consider the emotional weight of such a pact, Imagine 9 men kneeling in a chamber faintly lit by torches, the dust of centuries clinging to their hair and robes. They look at one another and understand that words are too fragile, that parchment can burn, but silence endures. They seal their unity not with ink, but with breath held in the same stale air, a covenant not written but inhaled. From that night onward, their silence is their treasure, and their treasure their silence. The quirkier tales that orbit this covenant are both charming and haunting. One legend insists that among the stones they found a chamber whose walls hummed when struck, as though tuned to some forgotten chord. The knights, curious, tapped the walls in sequence until a harmony emerged, a sound like a psalm hidden in limestone. Whether true or not, the image lingers, men of war transformed into listeners, their ears pressed to stone, discovering not relics, but resonance.
My son,
in such stories, the covenant appears less like law and more like music, a melody that binds them beyond the reach of kings. And yet always, debate remains. Some modern historians argue the idea of a covenant of knowledge is retrospective projection imposed by later centuries enchanted by esoteric lore. To them, the Templars were pragmatic men who secured their mission by papal endorsement, not by secret wisdom. Still, even these sober voices cannot entirely dismiss the aura of mystery. For mystery is itself a fact of history, shaping behavior, inspiring allegiance, instilling fear. The covenant may be unprovable, but its echo is undeniable. Close your eyes and feel it. Not parchment, not relic, not coin, but a hum beneath the ribs, a pattern sensed rather than seen. The covenant without a name is not a treasure locked in chest or vault. It is the whisper that stone proportions matter, that silence speaks, that breath itself can be vow. It is fragile, debated, uncertain, yet powerful enough to shape centuries of legend. When the knights stepped back into the sunlight of Jerusalem, their faces shadowed by the weight of this covenant, they carried no trophies. Yet pilgrims who looked upon them sensed something different. These were not simply soldiers, they were keepers of a hush. The covenant had clothed them, invisibly but tangibly, and from that moment onward the world would never again see them as ordinary men of war. The echo of this covenant spread outward, like ripples from a stone cast into water. Soon it would thread itself into architecture, into rituals, into the very identity of the order. But for now it remained hidden, an ember banked deep within. The covenant without a name was a seed, and in time it would bear strange fruit, symbols, churches, mysteries that both inspired devotion and provoked suspicion. The silence that began beneath the mount would follow them into Europe, into forests and cathedrals, into whispered accusations and fearful respect. The covenant would shape them as much as they shaped it. And in that tension between secrecy and revelation, between silence and proclamation, the story of the Templars would find its path. The air of Jerusalem held its breath, as though aware that something had shifted. Dust settled, torches guttered, and the 9 knights rose, bound now by a vow not written, but breathed. Above them, the city sang hymns of victory. Beneath, the earth whispered of harmony. Between the two, the covenant lingered, waiting to unfold in stone and song across the continents. If these first whispers keep you company, you're welcome to stay with Serene Myths, a gentle like or subscribe, or a quiet note of where and when you're listening is always enough. And so the silence of the mount began its journey outward, a hidden bell tolling softly across Europe, drawing the knights into a destiny where secrecy itself became their most potent weapon. When the 9 knights returned to Europe, They did not return as men unchanged. Jerusalem had given them silence, dust, and a covenant without a name. That silence lingered on their breath, and it shaped the way they built their brotherhood. To the world, they were soldiers of Christ, protectors of pilgrims, defenders of the Holy Land. But within their circle, something more intricate unfolded, something quieter. Their vows seemed to split into two layers, one public, written and visible, the other hidden, breathed rather than spoken. In this division lay both their strength and their doom. The official vows of the Templars were simple enough. Poverty, chastity, obedience, these were the same promises uttered by monks across Christendom. They renounced wealth, swore celibacy, and submitted to the will of their masters. Yet unlike monks cloistered behind abbey walls, the Templars lived half their lives on horseback, their swords gleaming under foreign suns. They were monks of the battlefield, men whose prayers were whispered not only in chapels, but also in the press of combat. To many, that paradox alone was mystery enough. How could men sworn to peace live by war? The answer, the order insisted, was that their battle was holy, their swords an extension of prayer. But behind the public vows there flickered hints of another binding, one less visible. Some brothers were said to exchange a subtle hand tap before Compline, the final prayers of the day. The touch was brief, almost unnoticeable, but it carried the weight of recognition, as though saying, "You and I share something more." Chroniclers describe secret signs, gestures known only to the initiated, little movements of the hand or tilt of the head that marked belonging. To the casual eye, these were nothing. To those within, they were the true passwords, the real pledge. Mainstream historical fact does confirm a layered structure within the order. There were knights, sergeants, chaplains, each with different duties and degrees of privilege. Some held positions of command, others served in humble roles. Yet beyond this practical hierarchy, rumors of an inner circle persisted, whispers of an esoteric college hidden within the martial brotherhood. Some later writers believed that only a select few shared in the deeper knowledge brought from Jerusalem, while the rest lived out the visible rule of poverty and combat. Whether such an inner college truly existed remains debated. It may be no more than projection, a reflection of how secrecy tends to generate suspicion. Still, the notion is powerful. Imagine a firelit hall in a commandery of France, the knights gathered after a long day of training. Most speak of tactics, supply lines, the routes of pilgrims. But in a shadowed corner, two brothers sit close, their conversation hushed. They speak not of swords or roads, but of proportions, of symbols carved in stone, of the strange silence that once hummed beneath Jerusalem. The others notice nothing, yet within that quiet dialogue, the true legacy of the covenant is carried forward. This is how secrets travel, not in scrolls, but in murmurs passed between the trusted. A quirky story survives from the archives of Burgundy, though historians doubt its authenticity. It tells of a knight who, before battle, carried a small piece of parchment inscribed not with scripture, but with a geometric spiral. He claimed it was his true shield, more powerful than iron. His brothers laughed, yet when he survived a clash that cut down many others, whispers grew. The parchment vanished after his death, and no one could say whether it had been charm, coincidence, or the faith of a man who believed in proportion as much as prayer. Such stories reveal the curious undercurrent that ran through the order, a willingness to believe in things not entirely orthodox, a conviction that unseen laws guided both stone and steel. And here lies the debated heart. Did the Templars deliberately cultivate a hidden doctrine, or were such tales simply projections by outsiders, dazzled by their secrecy? Some scholars argue that the order was pragmatic, focused on warfare and finance, not mystical rites. Others point to the persistence of rumors across centuries as evidence that something more lingered beneath the surface. The truth may lie in between. Perhaps the order itself was divided not only by formal hierarchy, but by layers of understanding. The majority lived by the plain rule, while a few carried forward the covenant of silence and pattern. This duality, the public vow and the hidden bond, shaped the character of the order. To outsiders, they were an enigma. Their poverty was visible, their obedience evident, yet they wielded wealth and influence beyond kings. Their chastity was proclaimed, yet whispers of strange initiations circulated. Such contradictions invite suspicion. People began to ask, what do they really swear to Christ, to Rome, or to something older hidden in the dust of the Temple Mount? The question itself became more dangerous than any answer. Imagine the emotional burden of carrying two vows at once, to kneel in chapel and swear the public oath with all the solemnity of ritual, while also carrying in one's heart the unspoken covenant of silence. One vow binds you to the church, the other binds you to your brothers and to the earth beneath Jerusalem. The tension must have been immense, like living two lives within one body. Perhaps this explains the stillness often described by chroniclers. The Templars were not loud men, not prone to boasting. They spoke sparingly, moved deliberately as though guarding not only their honor, but also their words, careful never to let one vow betray the other. Close your eyes and you may see them. Knights in white mantles marked by red crosses, riding in silence through forests dark with mist. To villagers they are holy warriors, men blessed by Rome. But among themselves they exchange the quiet hand tap, the subtle sign, and in that moment the deeper vow glimmers like an ember. They are bound twice over, and it is that double binding that makes them both formidable and fragile. The division of vows is not unique in history. Many orders and societies have walked with two faces, one public, one hidden. Yet for the Templars, whose power grew so swiftly, the duality was especially dangerous. For as long as their silence held, it gave them unity and mystery. But when enemies sought to unravel them, the same silence became accusation. What they would not speak of was taken as proof of guilt. Their hidden vow, once strength, became snare. For now, though, in the early chapters of their rise, the vows remained unbroken. The order grew in numbers, in prestige, in authority. Pilgrims trusted them, kings respected them, the church sanctified them. Yet beneath it all, the covenant hummed, secret and unseen, a quiet rhythm that guided their steps. And so the Templars moved forward, carrying both faces of their vow. The public face shone in banners, in processions, in the red cross, stitched bright. The hidden face flickered in whispered signs, in geometric doodles, in the silence of men who had once breathed dust beneath Jerusalem. It was this hidden face that would shape their architecture, their symbols, their very identity in years to come. From the split vows we move onward into stone and song, where geometry and music become sermons, built not with words, but with ratios. The next chapter of their story unfolds not in caverns, but in cathedrals, where silence finds new voice in arches and bells. When the Templars returned to Europe, they carried little that could be touched by hand. No golden relics, no jeweled vessels, no scrolls to display in courts. What they bore instead was a memory, a pattern glimpsed in the silence beneath Jerusalem. And that pattern, invisible as breath, found its way into stone. The order did not only fight, it built. Across the landscapes of France, Portugal, England and Spain, churches and commanderies rose. They were simple in some places, austere fortresses in others. Yet here and there, in curves and measures, in arches and windows, the whisper of something deeper could be felt. Codes written in stone, songs sung through ratio, these became the sermons of the Templars, silent yet resonant. The Gothic style, so closely linked with the 12th and 13th centuries, did not belong solely to the Templars. It was a movement across Christendom, born of innovations in engineering, the pointed arch, the ribbed vault, the flying buttress. These allowed walls to grow thin, windows to expand, light to pour in as though the heavens themselves wished to inhabit stone. Yet within this great flowering, certain churches associated with the Templars seemed to hum differently. Their round chapels echoed the design of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Their proportions spoke in tones more measured, more deliberate. It was as though the knights, remembering the silence of the Mount, carved that silence into the walls themselves. Fact tells us that Templar commanderies were spread across Europe, their architecture both practical and symbolic. Round churches modelled on the rotunda of the Holy Sepulchre stood at London, Tomar, Lyon. These shapes were unusual in the West, where basilica plans dominated. To kneel in a round chapel was to feel oneself enclosed, embraced by circle rather than line. The geometry itself preached, the circle has no end, unity without edge, eternity drawn into stone. To common villagers, these chapels were simply holy places, but to the knights, they may have been reminders of Jerusalem, of the covenant of proportion, glimpsed in dust. One can imagine a mason standing on scaffolding, humming softly as he measures a span with his twine. His tune is not idle. It matches the interval between ribs, the rhythm of arches. Builders of the age often sang as they worked, not only to pass time, but to keep rhythm. And so the church rose as music embodied. The ribs of a vault were not merely supports, they were notes in a hymn carved in limestone. This image, half fact and half dream, suggests how architecture became song, how stone itself could be tuned like an instrument of devotion. The quirky tales of such building abound. In Chartres, it was said that a mason once insisted the cathedral was a harp, each rib a string, each arch a resonance. He claimed that if you stood in the crossing at twilight and hummed the right pitch, the stone would answer. No record proves this tale, and yet visitors still speak of the peculiar acoustics, the way sound seems to climb the walls as though seeking heaven. Whether myth or memory, it captures the spirit of the age, a belief that harmony was more than art, it was truth, that number and music were forms of prayer. The debated heart here is whether the Templars truly intended to encode hidden meanings into their architecture, or whether later generations imposed that reading upon them. Some scholars argue that the round chapels were practical imitations of Jerusalem's holy sites, nothing more. Others see in their proportions, in their ratios, a deliberate echo of sacred geometry preserved from older traditions. Still others caution that we should not overread, that human minds find patterns even where none were intended. And yet, the persistence of the idea that Templar buildings were more than stone, that they were codes, continues to enchant. Close your eyes and picture it. A chapel rises in a clearing of forest, its walls pale in moonlight. Villagers see only stone and mortar, but the knight kneeling within sees more. He sees the ratios of nave to transept whispering of harmony, the curve of arch recalling the silence of the mount, the window casting light not randomly, but with measured purpose. He hears in the hush of the evening the faint music of numbers, as though the church itself breathes in time with the heavens. It is this dual vision, ordinary to some, extraordinary to others, that kept the aura of the Templars alive. For the people of the villages, the churches were simply places of worship. For the knights, perhaps, they were reminders of a covenant of proportion, a secret sermon spoken not in words, but in ratios. And for us, centuries later, they are questions set in stone. Another quirk that lingers is the story of masons humming intervals. One chronicler tells of builders who checked the accuracy of vault spans by singing a note and listening for its echo. If the echo rang clear, the measure was true. If it wavered, the line was flawed. Whether real or metaphorical, it suggests how intimately sound and stone were entwined in medieval thought. To build was to sing, and to sing was to pray. Thus, the cathedrals and chapels became not just architecture, but frozen hymns, resonant still. Debate rages still among scholars and enthusiasts. Were the Templars guardians of sacred geometry, encoding cosmic truths into their buildings? Or were they simply practical patrons of builders, their chapels no different than others save for shape? The absence of direct evidence leaves us wandering in mist, listening to echoes, uncertain whether we hear design or coincidence. And yet, in that uncertainty lies the charm. For mystery, even when unprovable, breathes life into stone. The emotional resonance of these buildings cannot be denied. To step into Chartres, to stand beneath the ribs of Tomar, to walk the round of London's Temple Church, is to feel something shift. Light bends differently there, sound lingers longer. The air itself seems tuned. Whether by design or by accident, these places whisper of harmony, of balance, of a covenant hidden yet enduring. Imagine the bells ringing in such a place, their tones weaving through arches, resonating against stones set by hands long gone. Each peal becomes not only a call to prayer, but a reminder of proportion, a song of numbers carried on air. The villagers hear summons to worship, the knights hear the hum of the cosmos. And somewhere between those two hearings lies the truth of the order, half practical, half mystical, wholly human. The Templars lived in this tension between stone and song, fact and myth, vow and covenant. Their buildings stand still, mute yet resonant, singing the ratios they once breathed beneath Jerusalem. They are sermons in limestone, codes etched not with ink, but with hammer and chisel, prayers that endure even when words fail. From these codes in stone, the story unfolds further, carrying us to specific doors, Chartres, Tomar, Paris, where the whispers of geometry become more tangible, and where the covenant finds new expression in glass, in carving, in plan. The path winds onward, and the song continues. Every covenant needs its vessels, places where silence can take form, where memory can be anchored in stone. For the Templars, such vessels stood scattered across Europe, each a doorway through which whispers of Jerusalem seemed to pass. Not countless, not every church, but a few chosen works where proportion and prayer intertwined with uncanny resonance. Three of these doors open most vividly: Chartres, Tomar, and Paris. To walk through them is to walk through layers of time, into spaces where geometry hums like hidden psalms. Let us begin in France, in the fields south of Paris, where the Cathedral of Chartres rises like a mountain of light. Though not built solely by the Templars, it was steeped in the same currents of thought that animated their covenant. Chartres is often spoken of as a book in stone, its carvings and windows a library of theology. Yet what lingers most for the dreamer is not the words of its carvings, but the music of its proportions. The nave stretches like a chant, each bay echoing the rhythm of a psalm line, its labyrinth on the floor, a spiral meant for pilgrims to walk in prayer, whispers of the wax tablets the knights once traced in silence. Fact reminds us, the labyrinth is genuine, laid in the 13th century, still visible to this day. Quirky lore tells that masons, before laying its stones, argued over whether it should lead inward or outward, one insisting that prayer should spiral into mystery, the other that it should spiral out into light. The debate ended in compromise, but the labyrinth remains, a frozen argument in stone. Scholars debate whether Chartres encodes secret wisdom or whether its harmony is simply the fruit of brilliant design. Some argue that its stained glass arranges constellations, that its dimensions align with planetary ratios, that its builders sang geometry into stone. Others caution that such readings are afterthoughts, projections of yearning eyes. And yet when you stand there, in the hush of its vastness, watching the sun blaze through sapphire windows, you feel something precise, as though more than accident guided the hand. The debate itself becomes part of the mystery, and perhaps the mystery is the message. Now cross the mountains south and west until you reach Portugal, where the convent of Tomar still stands. Here, the Templars' imprint is unmistakable. The round church at Tomar, inspired directly by the rotunda of the Holy Sepulchre, remains a jewel of sacred geometry. Its pillars rise like clustered trees, its space encircles worshippers with the embrace of a circle, no end, no edge. To step inside is to step into a memory of Jerusalem, transplanted into Iberian soil. Fact affirms that Tomar was a Templar stronghold, its church deliberately round, its design echoing the covenant of proportion. Quirky tales insist that knights riding to Tomar at dusk would circle the church 3 times before entering, as though acknowledging its embrace before stepping inside. Was it ritual, or simply a habit that became legend? The villagers whispered that the circling was protective, like a chant in motion. Here too debate continues. Was the round form intended purely as imitation of the sepulchre, a symbolic claim of continuity with the Holy Land? Or was it something deeper, a vessel for the covenant, a deliberate echo of the geometry the knights once glimpsed beneath the mount? Historians disagree, some pointing to practical symbolism, others to esoteric resonance. Yet the round form itself needs no defense. Its presence alone is testimony. It is unusual, distinctive, and it hums with meaning, even if we cannot agree what that meaning is. And then to Paris, where the Temple Church once stood in the heart of the city, its stones now lost to time. In its day, it was the center of the Templar world, the treasury of kings, the seat of power and secrecy. Fact records its round nave, again mirroring Jerusalem's Holy Sepulchre. Quirky legend says that on certain feast days the knights would light candles in a circle, each flame equidistant, a living echo of the geometry of the church itself. Whether true or imagined, it conjures a striking image. Steel-clad men bowed before a circle of fire, silence deep as the forest at night. The Temple of Paris was not merely a building, but a statement, a reminder that their covenant was not forgotten, that the geometry of Jerusalem had been carried into the very heart of Europe. Yet here too debate lingers. Was Paris's temple simply a fashionable echo of the Holy Land, a prestige project for wealthy patrons? Or was it a deliberate vessel of silence, a reminder to the inner circle of what they once uncovered in dust and breath? No document answers, only rumor, only echo. Yet the aura persists, as though stones themselves retain memory, as though geometry is a language that does not die even when buildings fall. Close your eyes and imagine walking through these 3 doors. First Chartres, the labyrinth under your feet, spiraling like a prayer. Then Tomar, the circle embracing you, no end, no edge, just the hum of proportion. Finally Paris, candles in a round, nights in silence, steel softened by flame. 3 doors, 3 echoes, each different, each carrying the whisper of the covenant. Ordinary to some, extraordinary to others, but together forming a triad of memory that binds earth to heaven. The quirky details matter here. The argument of the masons over the labyrinth, the circling of horses around Tomar, the ring of candles in Paris, these small images make the buildings live. They remind us that architecture is not only geometry, but story, not only ratio, but ritual. People moved within these spaces, prayed, laughed, argued, and through their movements, the buildings became vessels not of stone alone, but of human breath. The codes in stone were not static, they were activated by life, by song, by step. And always the debate returns. Did the Templars deliberately encode secret knowledge, or are we simply weaving stories upon stone? Historians wrestle with the evidence, torn between skepticism and enchantment. The truth may be that both are real, that even if the builders did not intend all we imagine, the buildings still carry power, still shape silence, still breathe harmony. Sometimes meaning is less about intention and more about reception. The covenant may not be provable, yet it is felt in every footstep upon the labyrinth, in every echo beneath the round domes. So these 3 doors stand, each a passage into mystery. They are not relics locked in chests, but living thresholds. To enter is to cross from the ordinary into the extraordinary, from the visible into the hidden. Chartres, Tomar, Paris. 3 voices of a single song, 3 echoes of a silence first breathed beneath Jerusalem. And beyond them the story stretches further still. For behind the geometry and the song lies a lineage older than the nights, whispers of ascetic custodians in desert caves, of sects who guarded mysteries before the Crusaders ever set foot in the Holy Land. To trace those whispers is to move from stone to scripture, from architecture to ancestry, from Templars to the Essenes and others who came long before. The path bends onward, carrying us deeper into the forest of history, where echoes wait to be heard again. The Templars, for all their mystery, did not exist in a vacuum. Every covenant, no matter how secret, carries with it echoes of older voices, fragments of traditions that have passed like shadows across centuries. If the knights believed they had uncovered something beneath Jerusalem, that knowledge did not spring from stone alone. It would have been shaped by whispers of those who came before, custodians of silence who lived in deserts and caves, who guarded their own mysteries long before the first cross was stitched upon a white mantle. Among these older keepers, the Essenes are most often named, though their legacy remains a matter of both fascination and dispute. Mainstream history acknowledges the Essenes as a Jewish sect, flourishing around the Second Temple period. Josephus, the first-century historian, described them as ascetics living apart from the cities, sharing property, keeping strict rules of purity. They dwelled near the Dead Sea in settlements like Qumran, where in modern times the Dead Sea Scrolls were unearthed. These scrolls revealed fragments of ancient scripture, commentaries, hymns, and rules of community. To some, the Essenes appear as precursors of monasticism, men who sought harmony through discipline, who believed knowledge and holiness required separation from the noise of the world. Their memory persisted faintly in medieval imagination, resurfacing whenever whispers of hidden wisdom were sought. For the Templars, who returned from Jerusalem cloaked in silence, the parallel was tempting. Knights who lived by vows, who carried a hidden covenant, might have seen themselves as heirs to an older brotherhood. The Essenes had guarded scriptures in clay jars, sealed with wax, buried in caves until time itself delivered them. The Templars, according to legend, discovered scrolls of their own beneath the mount. The symmetry was striking. One group hid, another uncovered, yet both bound by silence, both believing they were protectors of something larger than themselves. A quirky story told centuries later claimed that among the scrolls the knights allegedly found was a hymn remarkably similar to one preserved in the Dead Sea texts. The hymn praised the order of the stars, the law of proportion, the harmony of the Creator's hand. No evidence supports this tale, yet the image is vivid. Armored men crouched in torchlight, reciting lines first sung by desert ascetics 1,000 years before. It is the kind of story that lingers not because it is proven, but because it feels true to the imagination, weaving the knights into a lineage of keepers stretching across ages. But scholars debate fiercely whether any real connection existed. The Dead Sea Scrolls, after all, were not discovered by modern eyes until the 20th century. Could the Templars have found fragments centuries earlier? Most historians doubt it, noting that no reliable record confirms such a discovery. They argue that linking the Templars to the Essenes is a romantic projection, an attempt by later generations to frame the knights as heirs to esoteric wisdom. And yet the very persistence of the story suggests something more than chance. Why, among all possible ancestors, do the Essenes so often appear in Templar lore? Perhaps because they embody the archetype of secret guardianship, the very archetype the Templars themselves came to represent. It is worth pausing to imagine the emotional resonance of this echo. Picture a Templar knight kneeling in a candlelit chapel in France, recalling the silence of the caverns beneath Jerusalem. In his heart, he may sense kinship with those long-vanished ascetics of the desert, men who also bound themselves with vows, who also wrote by torchlight, who also guarded truths the wider world could not yet bear. He would not need proof of lineage. The kinship would be felt, not documented, a resonance of silence across centuries. The quirky details give this resonance texture. One tale tells of a desert library sealed not with locks but with jars of honey, the scrolls suspended in sweetness to preserve them. Another describes monks who mark time not with bells but with the rising and setting of stars, their prayers aligned with constellations rather than church clocks. Whether true or not, such details paint a world of devotion woven into nature, knowledge hidden as much in sky and hive as in parchment. When the Templars are imagined as inheritors of such traditions, their silence seems less an invention of necessity and more an echo of a rhythm already ancient. Yet the debate refuses to resolve. Were the Templars truly heirs to Essenes, or merely likened to them by the imagination of later centuries? Some scholars propose that even if no scrolls were found, ideas of hidden brotherhood circulated widely in medieval culture. The Templars became magnets for such comparisons precisely because they embodied secrecy. In this view, the echo is not historical but symbolic. They represented the same archetype, and so storytellers linked them across time. Others insist that some transmission must have occurred, that not all echoes are accidents. that beneath Jerusalem perhaps fragments truly lay, binding the two orders in a chain of guardianship. Close your eyes and walk in the desert at night. The stars shimmer like lamps above an endless sea of sand. In a cave, a group of robed men huddle over parchment, whispering prayers. Centuries later, in a forest clearing of Europe, armored men kneel in a round chapel, candles flickering on steel, two images separated by time, yet resonant in posture, in silence, in devotion. The echo is unmistakable. Whether or not scrolls passed from one to the other, the posture itself is inheritance. Men bound to keep what must not yet be shouted, men who live by whispers rather than proclamations. It may be that the truth lies not in direct lineage, but in shared yearning. Human beings across ages have always sought hidden harmony, always believed that truth is fragile to be guarded by few until the world is ready. The Essenes embodied that belief in their desert caves. The Templars embodied it in their chapels and commanderies. The echo is not of fact, but of archetype, the repeated pattern of guardians rising in different ages to hold silence against the noise of empire. And so the Templars carried forward not only the covenant of proportion, but also the echo of older custodians. They became part of a lineage of secrecy, whether real or imagined, and that lineage shaped how they were seen by others. To the faithful, they were protectors of pilgrims. To the suspicious, they were heirs of forbidden wisdom. To themselves, perhaps, they were simply men bound by silence, carrying forward a breath first inhaled beneath Jerusalem, resonant still with the voices of those desert custodians who came before. If the ratios and road songs have soothed you, Serene Myths is here. You may like, subscribe, or leave the place and hour that find you tonight. From this echo, the story bends again. For if the Templars believed themselves heirs of a covenant stretching back to Solomon and beyond, then the covenant itself takes on new weight. It ceases to be merely about geometry or stone and becomes about destiny, about a pact woven into history's very fabric. That destiny would soon place them not only at odds with kings, but with the Church itself, for two covenants cannot long share the same throne. By the time the Templars had secured a foothold in Europe, their reputation had outgrown their numbers. They were still a relatively small order, scattered across commanderies from Iberia to the Rhine, but they carried an aura unlike any other. To the faithful, they were the defenders of pilgrims, the guardians of Jerusalem's memory, men sanctified by vows and steel. To the Church, they were both an asset and a puzzle, a brotherhood that had sprung from the Crusades, yet seemed bound to a silence deeper than military service. The papacy blessed them lavishly, and yet, with every blessing, suspicion clung like a shadow. They were blessed, yes, but also watched. Fact affirms that papal privilege flowed steadily toward the Templars. Pope Honorius II issued bulls that placed them under direct protection of the Holy See. They were exempted from local tithes and taxes, given authority to build their own oratories, and freed from the oversight of bishops. Pilgrims entrusted to their care multiplied, their coffers swelled with donations, their reach expanded across Europe. For a group that had begun as 9 anonymous knights beneath the Temple Mount, the transformation was astonishing. Within decades, they had become a transnational power, loyal not to any king, but directly to the Pope himself. And yet that very independence planted seeds of unease. The bishops resented losing authority over Templar lands. Kings eyed their exemptions with envy, unable to tax men who controlled castles and treasuries. Even within Rome, whispers rose. How could an order grow so quickly, so silently, without unseen foundations? Papal blessings carried with them papal eyes, and those eyes never looked away for long. The tension between blessing and suspicion emerges vividly in chronicles of the 12th century. On one hand, popes praise the knights as soldiers of Christ, paragons of discipline, instruments of divine will. On the other hand, councils debated their privileges. Murmurs of arrogance and secrecy echoed through clerical halls. A quirk recorded by a monastic scribe hints at this unease. In the margins of a papal bull granting new freedoms to the Templars, the scribe doodled a row of tiny bells. Perhaps it was nothing, mere play of the hand. Yet the bells toll in our imagination as symbols of scrutiny, the reminder that every gift of Rome came with the sound of surveillance ringing faintly behind it. The debated question is whether the papacy truly feared doctrinal drift within the order, or whether their concern was merely financial and political. Some historians argue that the Vatican's suspicion was pragmatic. The Templars were becoming too wealthy, too autonomous, an order answerable only to the Pope, but wielding resources that rivaled kingdoms. Others suggest a subtler anxiety, that rumors of hidden covenants and esoteric practices unsettled the hierarchy of the Church. Even if such rumors were unfounded, their persistence alone could provoke fear. For an institution built on authority, nothing is more dangerous than mystery that cannot be controlled. Close your eyes and picture a papal court in Rome. Cardinals sit beneath frescoed ceilings, their robes bright scarlet against the white marble. Messengers arrive, bearing news from the east. Templars guarding pilgrims, Templars building fortresses, Templars swelling in number. At first, the room hums with approval, but then another messenger arrives with whispers of rituals conducted in silence, of hidden vows, of brothers who speak less like soldiers and more like priests of a secret order. The cardinals frown, the Pope drums his fingers. Bless them, yes, for their service, but watch them too, for silence is a double-edged sword. The quirky human side of this tension also deserves telling. In one tale, a papal envoy visiting a Templar commandery noted the starkness of their meals, bread, wine, little else. Yet he also noticed how they paused before drinking, each touching his cup in a pattern that seemed more ritual than habit. The envoy returned to Rome and reported with both admiration and suspicion. To him, the gesture looked like a hidden prayer, something not in any official liturgy. Perhaps it was merely camaraderie, perhaps a private vow. But to the wary eye, it was another bell tolling softly, another reminder that the knights lived by two layers of vow. Emotionally, this duality must have pressed heavily on the order. To be praised as holy warriors and yet distrusted as secret keepers is a burden that sharpens discipline. Every procession, every public ritual had to be immaculate, lest the eyes of Rome find fault. And still, no perfection of outward obedience could erase the memory of 9 silent years beneath the mount. That silence, breathed in dust and darkness, remained the kernel of their identity. It could not be paraded before papal courts nor confessed in episcopal halls. It could only be carried like a hidden ember glowing beneath the white mantle. The debate over Rome's suspicion mirrors the broader tension of the Middle Ages between orthodoxy and mysticism. The Church insisted upon unity, upon doctrine codified and uniform. Yet, human hearts yearned for mystery, for whispers of truths deeper than sermons. The Templars, by their very aura, embodied that yearning. They were orthodox soldiers of the cross, and yet something in their silence invited the imagination to see them as more. Rome perhaps feared less what the knights actually believed than what others imagined them to believe. And in that imagination lay power beyond papal control. The sound of bells follows this chapter of their story. Bells rang in villages to call the faithful to prayer. Bells tolled in cathedrals to mark the hours of divine office. Bells pealed in cities to celebrate victories. And yet, in the margins of papal decrees, bells also appeared as doodles, reminders of watchfulness. The knights may have ridden with steel at their sides, but above them always tolled the bells of Rome, blessing, warning, counting. Close your eyes, and you may hear those bells now. They toll not with clarity, but with ambiguity. Each strike both praise and suspicion. They ring in cathedrals, in fields, in papal courts, and the Templars ride beneath them, their silence unbroken, their vows split in two, their covenant hidden within. They are blessed, yes, but also watched, and in that watching lies the seed of future conflict, for no order can live forever in the tension between gift and suspicion. The story bends onward, for the cross they bore upon their mantles was not only symbol of Christ, but also perhaps a grid of geometry, a pattern tied to Solomon's temple and to the covenant itself. To explore that symbol is to step into deeper debate into the heart of what the Templars carried upon their very bodies. The red cross is perhaps the most enduring symbol of the Templars. Simple in form, unmistakable in its starkness, it adorned their mantles, their banners, their shields. To the common eye, it was the mark of Christ's warriors, a sign of sacrifice and holy duty. To kings and popes, it was proof of loyalty, visible testimony that these knights fought under the sign of the cross. And yet beneath that simplicity, the cross carried layers of meaning, layers debated even in their own time. Some saw geometry where others saw only faith, a hidden grid traced upon cloth, binding the knights not only to Christ, but to something older, something whispered from the stones of Jerusalem. Fact tells us that the Red Cross was officially granted to the Templars in 1147 by Pope Eugenius III. It was to be worn on their mantles, a sign of their special vocation. The color red symbolized martyrdom, the willingness to shed blood in defense of the faith. Across Europe, villagers who saw the white-clad knights with crimson crosses upon their chests recognized instantly who they were. It was branding before the age of printing, a mark as potent as any flag. To the church, it signified devotion. To enemies, it signified danger. But the quirkier stories linger in the margins. One tale recounts the debates among tailors who stitched the crosses. Some insisted on precise symmetry, each arm equal in length, the tips squared. Others favored elongated forms, the vertical stem longer, resembling a crucifix. In some commanderies, arguments arose so heated that masters had to intervene. The tailors, it was said, measured thread counts as though souls depended on them, quarreling over angles and ratios while knights prepared for war. The humor of it lies in the image, warriors waiting for their mantles, while tailors fought miniature crusades with needles. Beneath this quirk lies a deeper question. Were the proportions of the cross purely symbolic, or were they intended as geometry, a cipher hidden in plain sight? Some modern interpreters argue that the angles of the Templar cross echo ratios tied to Solomon's temple, to patterns of sacred measure whispered from antiquity. Others dismiss this as imaginative projection, noting that medieval crosses varied widely without uniform proportion. The truth is debated, suspended between faith and geometry, between devotion and design. Close your eyes and picture the mantle, white wool, coarse yet dignified, the red cross stitched upon the chest. In sunlight it blazes like a wound, in torchlight it glows like ember. To an enemy it is a mark of fear, for men who wear it ride with discipline and ferocity. To a pilgrim it is a mark of safety, for men who wear it stand as guardians, and the knights themselves. Perhaps it was both, and perhaps also more, a reminder of vows, of silence, of a covenant without a name. One legend, told by a chronicler with a taste for wonder, claimed that the cross was designed not merely as symbol, but as map. Each arm marked a direction, each angle a ratio, the whole forming a grid that mirrored the Temple Mount itself. Worn upon the heart, it aligned the knight's body with Jerusalem, as though he himself became a living temple, a vessel of proportion. No evidence survives to prove this, yet the image lingers. Armored men riding as embodiments of geometry, their very garments tuned to echo ancient stone. Debate continues. Some historians argue that such geometric readings are fanciful, products of later centuries enthralled by esoteric lore. They remind us that the papacy itself decreed the cross as sign of martyrdom, not as cipher. And yet the persistence of alternative interpretations cannot be denied. Symbols live by ambiguity. The Red Cross could be both a badge of faith and, to some, a vessel of hidden ratios. That duality is precisely what made it powerful. The emotional weight of wearing the cross was immense. To don the mantle was to surrender individuality. No coat of arms, no family crest, only the cross, identical for all. In battle, the knights were indistinguishable, a tide of white and red, moving as one body. That anonymity was discipline, but also devotion. The self vanished, the order endured. To wear the cross was to carry death lightly, to accept in advance the possibility of martyrdom. Yet it was also to carry mystery, for each knight knew that beneath the surface meaning, whispers of deeper truth clung. The quirky side appears again in smaller details. A tale from a French commandery tells of a mantle stitched with a cross too large, its arms stretching almost to the hem. The knight complained he could hardly move without tripping on the fabric. His brothers laughed, teasing that he carried a cathedral upon his chest. In another account, a young initiate accidentally stitched his cross slightly crooked. Rather than replace it, the master allowed him to keep it, saying, "Even crooked, the cross finds its way to heaven." These stories soften the austerity of the order, reminding us that even in silence, humanity persisted. And yet, suspicion lingered. Enemies of the order, especially in later centuries, accused them of desecrating the cross, of spitting upon it in secret rites. These charges, most likely fabrications born of political malice, reveal how deeply the symbol cut. To accuse the Templars of mocking their own cross was to accuse them of betraying the very heart of their identity. Whether true or false, the accusation shows that the cross was never neutral. It carried power enough to sanctify and enough to condemn. Close your eyes and imagine the scene. Knights gathered at dawn, mantles draped across their shoulders, red crosses glowing in first light. A bell tolls, steel glints, the world awakens. The villagers see holy warriors, the papacy sees devoted servants, but within the silence of the order, the cross hums with meanings unspoken. Is it martyrdom? Is it geometry? Is it both intertwined? No one answer satisfies, and perhaps that is the secret. The cross, like the covenant, lives in ambiguity, and so the Red Cross stands as both symbol and question. It is devotion worn upon the heart, and perhaps also geometry stitched into cloth. It is uniform yet varied in proportion. It is holy to the faithful, feared by enemies, debated by scholars. It is at once simple and inexhaustible. And through it, the Templars carried forward the tension that defined them: public loyalty and hidden silence, visible faith and whispered mystery. From this symbol, we move onward into another form of power the Order carried, not just marks upon cloth, but wealth upon ledgers, gold across kingdoms, whispers woven into commerce. For beyond the geometry of crosses lay the arithmetic of coin, a new kind of influence that made them both indispensable and dangerous. If the Red Cross was the most visible mark of the Templars, gold was their most invisible. Not the kind carried openly in chests through villages, nor coins jingling at a merchant's belt, but gold in the form of trust, of records, of whispers that bound distant lands together. What began as the guardianship of pilgrims grew into something far more enduring: the guardianship of wealth. Knights who once dug beneath the Temple Mount now oversaw a network of treasuries that stretched from Jerusalem to London, from Paris to Acre. Their silence, once shaped by dust and covenant, now enveloped ledgers, loans, and secrets written in ink. And in that silence, both rumor and power grew. Fact is clear enough. The Templars became bankers of Christendom. Pilgrims could deposit money in one city and withdraw it safely in another, carrying only coded receipts rather than heavy coin. Kings borrowed from them, nobles entrusted them with estates, merchants relied upon their security. Their commanderies, scattered across Europe, doubled as fortresses and financial houses. They were exempt from local taxes, answerable only to the Pope, which gave them independence unmatched by any secular bank. In a time when roads were perilous and theft common, the Templars offered something revolutionary: trust anchored in discipline. Yet the quirks of this system reveal its human side. One chronicler notes that in Paris, a Templar treasurer was nicknamed the Singer, because whenever the sums balanced at the end of the day, he hummed a little tune.
Thank you.
His brothers teased him, saying the chest itself was singing. And so the treasury became known as the singing chest, a phrase that lingered in rumor long after. To outsiders, it sounded mysterious, even ominous. Did the chest truly sing? Was it enchanted? To those within, it was only the voice of relief, a tune of numbers aligning. But as always, silence leaves space for imagination, and soon people whispered that the Templars had discovered ways of making gold multiply by sound alone. Rumor indeed became their constant companion. Whispers spread that the Order's wealth was bottomless, that their coffers were filled with relics more precious than coin. Some claimed they had found Solomon's treasure beneath the mount, gold hidden since the days of the kings of Israel. Others insisted their fortune came from alchemy, secret knowledge that turned base metals into riches. Still others said the devil himself filled their coffers in exchange for forbidden rites. None of these claims were proven, yet each took root in the fertile soil of secrecy. The less the knights spoke, the louder others imagined. The debated question is whether the Templars used rumor deliberately, cultivating mystery to enhance their authority, or whether they were simply victims of suspicion. Some scholars argue that their silence was strategic, allowing them to project power beyond their actual means. Others insist the knights were genuinely discreet, their humility misread as concealment. Whatever the case, the effect was the same. They became known not only as warriors, but as keepers of gold and secrets, their wealth as intangible as it was immense. Emotionally, this dual role must have been heavy. To ride as a soldier by day and then by night, to tally coins and secure ledgers, is to live two lives at once. Some knights surely chafed at the task, longing for battle instead of bookkeeping. Others perhaps found strange comfort in the order of numbers, the way ledgers aligned like psalms, each column a hymn of balance. In their silence, they must have felt the weight of trust. Kings depended on them, pilgrims relied upon them, villages survived by their loans. To fail in stewardship was as dangerous as failing in battle. A quirky tale from England tells of a farmer who deposited a small sum with the Templars for safekeeping. Years later, when he returned to claim it, the clerk could not find the record. The farmer, distraught, began to weep. Moved, the Templar offered him bread and wine while searching again. At last, the record appeared, and the money was returned. The farmer, convinced he had seen a miracle, spread the story that the knights could summon lost gold by prayer. From that day, he swore never to mistrust them. Such anecdotes, though small, built the aura of the order, weaving trust with superstition, silence with devotion. And yet the greater the wealth, the sharper the suspicion. Kings who once borrowed from the Templars began to envy them. Nobles feared their independence. Even the papacy, which had blessed them, watched warily as their coffers grew. Gold breeds power, and power breeds enemies. When the knights rode in battle, their steel was feared. When they guarded treasuries, their silence was distrusted. The combination proved combustible. Close your eyes and imagine a Templar treasury at dusk. The room is lit by a single candle, its flame trembling against stone walls. Chests sit in rows bound with iron. A clerk scratches in a ledger, his quill squeaking softly. Outside, bells toll the hour. The knight who once rode through forests now leans over columns of numbers, his mantle draped across a chair. To the world, he is a soldier of Christ. To himself, he is also a custodian of trust, a keeper of silence, measured not in vows but in coin. And in that silence, rumors grow like shadows, stretching far beyond the walls. Debate rages even today. Were the Templars truly wealthy beyond measure, or did myth exaggerate their riches? Records show substantial holdings, yet nothing infinite. Some argue their reputation for limitless wealth was itself a weapon, a projection of strength. Others believe hidden treasuries still lie buried, perhaps in crypts beneath castles, perhaps spirited away at the moment of their downfall. Each possibility fuels the imagination, for nothing invites story like unclaimed gold. The irony is that the very system they built, trust without visibility, wealth without display, made them vulnerable. For when the time came, their silence about what they truly held allowed enemies to accuse them of anything. To the jealous, silence meant sorcery. To the envious, it meant limitless treasure. To the fearful, it meant heresy. Their silence, once strength, became snare. And yet, in their day, that silence gave them unmatched reach. Kings came to them as debtors, pilgrims as clients, the church as beneficiary. They were the hidden bankers of Christendom, the golden thread stitching realms together. Their wealth was not only in coin, but in trust, and trust, like silence, is fragile. If this balance of gold and rumor has eased your breathing, you can let serene myths know with a soft like or subscribe, or a small line with your city and time. From the singing chests of Paris to the rumors of buried treasures, the order moved deeper into the paradox of being both sanctified and suspected. Their cross glowed in sunlight, their coffers hummed in shadow, and from that tension rose the quiet war with Rome, a conflict not fought with swords, but with suspicion, where blessing and watching grew into scrutiny and fear. The autumn morning of October 13th, 1307, dawned clear and ordinary in France. Villagers stirred from their beds, the mist of night still curling across fields. Bells began to toll, marking the hour, calling the faithful to prayer. But within cities and towns another sound followed, the tramp of boots, the clang of steel, the sharp bark of orders. Across the realm, the king's men moved in unison, as if the entire kingdom had conspired to rise at once. By sunset, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ, the guardians of pilgrims, the wearers of the Red Cross, would be prisoners. That day would be remembered not for ordinary harvest or prayer, but as the day the fire was lit beneath the Templars. Fact records it plainly. King Philip V of France, deeply indebted to the order, orchestrated the arrests. With the cooperation of Pope Clement V, though coerced, sealed warrants were opened simultaneously, commanding sheriffs and bailiffs to seize Templar properties, bind the knights and deliver them to dungeons. The charges were staggering: heresy, blasphemy, idol worship, obscene initiation rites, accusations designed not only to discredit but to terrify. To the faithful, such charges struck at the heart. Men once sanctified, now branded as mockers of Christ. To the knights themselves, the silence that had been their shield became their downfall. For silence in courtrooms is easily twisted into guilt. Quirky human details thread through this grim tapestry. One jailer in Paris, later deposed, confessed he timed his rounds by the ringing of the Vesper bells. Each evening, as the bells tolled across the city, he walked past cells where Templars sat chained, their mantles torn away, their crosses ripped from cloth. Some, he said, wept softly, others sat unmoving like statues carved of steel. He swore that one night, hearing the bells, would close his eyes and raise his shackled hands, as though still praying in chapel, defiant in silence. The jailer described this with awe, as though he could not decide if it was faith or madness. The debated heart of the matter is whether the confessions extracted from the Templars contained any truth. Under torture, men admitted to spitting upon the cross, to denying Christ, to worshipping a mysterious idol called Baphomet. Some historians argue that fragments of unorthodox ritual may indeed have existed, vestiges of secret vows misunderstood by outsiders. Others insist the confessions were nothing but agony's inventions, words forced from broken bodies. Still others suggest a middle path, that symbolic gestures intended as tests of humility or secrecy were magnified into blasphemy by hostile interrogators. The truth lies buried in burned parchment and silenced throats. Emotionally, the weight of that Friday is almost unbearable to imagine. Men who had ridden across continents, who had built churches and treasuries, who had guarded pilgrims and prayed in chapels, were dragged from their commanderies like criminals. The public, confused and fearful, watched as their protectors became prisoners overnight. Some wept, others jeered, most remained silent. Silence, always silence, wrapped around the order like a shroud. The knights themselves, bound in chains, held their silence too, and thus the charges rang louder than their defense. Close your eyes and hear the city. Bells toll, but instead of calling to prayer, they mark the rhythm of arrests. Hooves strike cobblestones, doors splinter, voices shout. Knights in white mantles, once symbols of trust, stumble into the streets with hands bound. Children cling to their mothers, watching as the red crosses vanish into shadow. Somewhere in a scriptorium, a clerk dips his quill and writes the date. Friday, the 13th of October. A date that will echo through centuries, tied forever to misfortune and fear. Quirky details of interrogation survive in records. A knight in Poitiers, when pressed to confess, insisted that his only idol was the chalice he raised at Mass. Another, when ordered to spit upon the cross, bent to kiss the floor instead, saying, "If I must choose, let my lips meet earth, for earth is God's creation too." Such fragments reveal humanity within horror, small acts of defiance or reinterpretation, moments when silence bent into whispered wit. These men, even broken, carried their covenant in gestures the inquisitors could not erase. Yet the machinery of power was relentless. Trials multiplied, dungeons filled, confessions were copied and spread. Rome hesitated, torn between supporting the king and defending the knights. But Philip pressed, his debts heavy, his ambition heavier. In the end, the papacy yielded. The order was condemned, its properties seized, its brothers scattered or burned. Friday's fire did not blaze in a single pyre, but in countless small acts. Parchments blackened with ink, mantles ripped, bells tolling above, while steel clanked below. Historians debate endlessly whether the Templars truly fell because of heresy or because of wealth. Was Philip driven by spiritual zeal, convinced of corruption, or by pragmatic greed, seeking their treasure? The weight of evidence leans toward greed, yet the myth of heresy lingers, for it speaks to deeper fears. The fear that beneath holy vows may lie hidden covenants, that beneath silence may lurk betrayal. In truth, silence is always ambiguous, and the Templars' silence allowed both possibilities to live. Imagine the jail once more, candlelight flickering against damp stone. The jailer passes, counting steps with bells. Within, a knight kneels, chains clinking softly, lips moving without sound. He may be reciting the Psalms, or he may be whispering a vow made long ago beneath Jerusalem. No one knows. His silence is his last defense, his last treasure. And when weeks later he is led to the stake, that silence burns with him, smoke curling upward like prayer. The fire of Friday the 13th spread beyond France. In England, in Spain, in Germany, arrests followed. Some knights escaped, some were absorbed into other orders, some vanished into obscurity. But the memory of that day could not be erased. It became legend, the beginning of the end, the moment when bells turned from blessing to dirge. The covenant, whatever it was, slipped deeper into secrecy, carried only by whispers, by rumor, by dreams. And so Friday's fire consumed not only bodies, but reputations, not only wealth, but trust. The knights, who once seemed unassailable, were broken by decree, their silence twisted into guilt, their red cross into accusation. Yet from the ashes, myths rose, for silence once planted cannot be burned away. It lingers like the toll of a bell long after its strike. From the smoke of those pyres, the story bends onward, into roads that forget names, into riders who vanish into mist, carrying silence into exile. For though Friday's fire burned hot, it did not consume every ember. Some embers drifted into forests, into mountains, into lands where memory could hide. And from those embers, new whispers would grow. When fire consumed the order in France, not every ember died. Some were scattered by the wind, glowing faintly in exile, carried along roads that did not record names. The suppression of the Templars was vast, but it was not absolute. Some knights were absorbed into other orders, some retreated into villages, others fled into regions where royal reach was weaker. Their mantles were torn, their crosses erased, their properties seized, but their silence endured. And along forgotten paths, whispers tell of riders who vanished into mist, leaving behind bells, blessings, and questions. Fact reminds us that the papal decree against the Templars was not uniformly enforced. In England, arrests came slower with more hesitation. In Iberia, kings were reluctant to extinguish an order that had defended their frontiers. In Portugal, the order was formally dissolved, yet its properties were transferred to a new body, the Order of Christ, which many scholars believe was simply the Templars reborn under another name. In Scotland, rumours flourished that knights fleeing persecution found refuge in the rugged north beyond papal enforcement. The traces are faint, but the pattern is clear. The Templars did not vanish everywhere at once. Their road curved, forked, and in some places continued under new banners. A quirky tale tells of a nameless rider who appeared in a Portuguese village not long after the suppression. He wore no cross, no mantle, only a cloak of rough wool. Yet before leaving, he gifted the village a bell, cast in plain bronze, saying only that it should toll for those who keep faith in silence. The villagers, puzzled, hung the bell in their chapel. For generations afterward, it was rung only at dusk, its sound low and solemn, called the Knight's Bell. Whether the rider was truly a Templar or a wanderer mistaken for one, the story endures, echoing the idea that remnants of the order moved quietly among common folk, leaving behind tokens instead of proclamations. The debated heart of this section is whether surviving Templars truly carried their covenant into exile, or whether such legends are retrospective inventions of communities longing for continuity. Some historians argue that fugitive knights were few, scattered, with no real power to continue secret traditions. Others insist that the sudden disappearance of records, combined with the persistence of myths, suggests deliberate concealment. Did Templar ships sail from La Rochelle, carrying treasures and brothers to unknown shores? Or is this but a tale woven by later generations to explain the sudden void? The truth remains clouded, a road without signposts where footsteps fade into silence. Emotionally, the image of knights stripped of identity, riding without banners, strikes deep. To wear a cross and then to lose it is to lose not only uniform but purpose. Yet perhaps in losing the visible, they clung more tightly to the invisible. Their vows, their silence, their covenant without a name, these could not be seized by kings nor burned by inquisitors. They travelled within, carried across forests and mountains, hidden in breath. The road that forgets your name may also preserve your essence, for without names, memory becomes pure silence. Close your eyes and picture it. A knight riding at dusk, his cloak plain, his horse weary. The road is empty save for crows wheeling overhead. He passes through a village, asks for bread, speaks little. By morning, he is gone. No record remains, no charter, no seal. Yet in the minds of those who saw him, the memory lingers, a man of silence, bearing something unseen. Centuries later, when tales of Templars in exile arise, villagers recall such wanderers and weave them into legend. Perhaps they were only travellers, perhaps they were more. On roads without names, certainty dissolves. Another quirky anecdote lingers in Scottish lore. In a coastal village, it is said, fishermen once saw armoured men practising with swords on the beach under moonlight, their movements deliberate, their silence unbroken. When the villagers approached, the men vanished into mist. The villagers swore they had seen Templars training in exile, their order alive in shadow. Skeptics dismiss this as folklore, yet the tale lives on, fueled by the human desire to believe that what is cast down may still rise in secret. The debate over Templar survival has filled countless pages. Did they truly continue as a hidden brotherhood, shaping Freemasonry centuries later, as some claim? Or did they simply fade, their memory magnified by the silence of records? The cautious historian leans toward dissolution, the romantic toward survival. But for the listener in the quiet of night, the truth lies less in documents than in resonance. Silence itself is survival, for as long as whispers persist, the order has not vanished entirely. Emotionally, the idea of nameless roads invites reflection. We live by names, by records, by recognition. To be erased is to be forgotten. Yet the Templars, stripped of names, linger more powerfully in imagination than in parchment. Their anonymity became their immortality. The nameless rider, the knight's bell, the moonlit swords, all endure because they are unprovable, because they live in mist. In this way, the road that forgets your name becomes the road that preserves your myth. Close your eyes again and hear the toll of that gifted bell. Its sound is not bright, but low, resonant, carrying through fields at dusk. Villagers pause, listen, cross themselves. To them it is just a bell. To us, it is an echo of a covenant carried onward, a fragment of silence gifted to strangers. The knight who left it is gone, nameless, faceless. But the bell rings still, long after kings and popes have turned to dust. Thus the Templars dispersed, carried along roads without markers, hidden in forests, folded into new orders, whispered into legend. Some may have died in obscurity, their silence unbroken. Others may have woven themselves into new brotherhoods, their vows transformed but not erased. The truth cannot be fixed, but perhaps that is fitting, for a covenant without a name must also walk a road without names. From these nameless roads, the story moves deeper into the underground. Not literal tunnels of Jerusalem this time, but the underground church of memory, where silence itself becomes architecture, where loaves and symbols carry what walls can no longer hold. For what cannot be built above ground can always be carried below, hidden yet enduring. Not all churches are built of stone. Some are woven from memory, from habit, from the way silence passes from one generation to the next. After the fires, after the arrests, after the roads that erased names, what remained of the Templars could not always be seen in castles or chapels. Instead, it lingered in the hidden ways people lived, in patterns too quiet to be written down, yet too persistent to die. This was the underground church, not a building with spires and bells, but a behavior, a rhythm of knowledge carried in hands, in songs, in symbols. Fact reminds us that medieval Europe was not a place of absolute erasure. Even when the papacy dissolved the order, their skills and habits found channels to survive. Knights were absorbed into other military orders like the Hospitallers or the Order of Christ in Portugal. Monastic scriptoria preserved texts, guilds of craftsmen inherited techniques of building and proportion, noble families remembered obligations and debts. A structure may collapse, but habits endure, and in those habits the covenant without a name continued to breathe, even if no one called it Templar anymore. Quirky stories illustrate how this breath of memory took shape. One baker in a French town was known for scoring his loaves in patterns of 6s and 5s, strange, deliberate marks that made villagers murmur. Was it superstition or an echo of sacred geometry learned from a wandering brother? Another tale tells of a stonemason who carved a spiral beneath the lintel of his house, invisible to all but those who stooped low. He said it brought harmony to the family. Scholars scoff, pointing out that people decorate for many reasons. Yet such gestures, humble as bread crusts or door carvings, may be fragments of something older carried unconsciously forward. The debated heart of this chapter is whether a continuous esoteric lineage truly stretched from the Templars into later brotherhoods, or whether human imagination wove connections out of longing. Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and other secret societies have often claimed ancestry from the temple. Some point to shared symbols, compasses, spirals, proportions as evidence of survival. Historians caution that such links are tenuous, often inventions of later centuries. Yet even skepticism cannot erase the resonance. The underground church may not be a literal chain of transmission, but a symbolic one, the repetition of silence, the persistence of patterns that refuse to vanish. Imagine it, a medieval town at dusk. The church bell tolls, villagers gather, prayers rise. Yet beneath the surface of ordinary devotion, small acts ripple quietly. A stonemason hums while measuring, his tune matching the span of a wall. A baker scores loaves with care, his knife tracing unseen ratios. A child draws a labyrinth in the dust, not knowing why the spiral feels right beneath her hand. No one calls these things Templar, no one writes them down. But the echo is there, quiet as breath, forming an invisible congregation, the underground church. The emotional texture of this hidden church is different from the grandeur of cathedrals. There is no blaze of stained glass, no chorus of organs, no towers rising against sky. Instead, there is intimacy, domesticity, gestures woven into daily life. It is less a monument than a heartbeat. Perhaps that is why it endured. Kings could seize castles, inquisitors could burn knights, but no decree could silence a song hummed by a mason at work, or erase a spiral scratched into bread. The covenant slipped into habits too small to persecute, too ordinary to notice. Quirky detail enriches this vision. In one town, it is said, children played a game of tracing circles on each other's palms, a game they called the Knight's Sign. No adult remembered its origin, yet it persisted for generations, part of play rather than ritual. Elsewhere, farmers planted trees in quincunx patterns, 4 at the corners, 1 in the center, saying it pleased the earth. Was this mere coincidence, or a faint echo of the geometries once carried beneath mantles of white and red? No one can say for certain, but silence often survives best in play, in habit, in the unnoticed. The debate over lineage often distracts from the deeper truth, that continuity need not be formal to be real. An underground church need not have names, charters, or seals. It lives in resonance, in repeated gestures that carry meaning without explanation. When we look for parchment evidence, we find absence. But when we look for echoes, in craft, in symbol, in silence, we find abundance. Perhaps the underground church was never an organization at all, but a way of being, a covenant breathed rather than signed. Close your eyes and see it again. A small house at the edge of a village, firelight flickering on a table. A father cuts bread, the crust scored with spiral. His children eat, laughing, unaware of any secret. Yet the spiral lives passed hand to hand, generation to generation, unnoticed yet unbroken. That is the underground church, ordinary life infused with extraordinary silence. Emotionally, there is a strange comfort in this idea. The visible order was destroyed, its knights burned, its wealth seized. Yet in the quiet folds of daily life, something slipped free of control. It hid in plain sight, woven into patterns too small for kings to notice. And in that hiding, it endured. The underground church did not need towers, for it built itself in hearts. It did not need bells, for it rang in silence. It did not need processions, for it walked in habits. The quirky, the ordinary, the debated, all converge here. A baker's knife, a mason's hum, a child's game. Are these truly Templar echoes, or merely coincidences we romanticize centuries later? The historian doubts, the dreamer believes, but perhaps belief itself is the point. For in believing, the underground church exists not as structure but as imagination, and imagination too is a form of survival. From here, the story bends toward its final chapter. The underground church whispers still, but night deepens. Ashes cool, forests close around fugitives. Silence becomes heavier, more symbolic. The covenant, once whispered beneath Jerusalem, now prepares to fade into mist, to toll its last bell beneath stone. And in that fading it finds its truest form, not as monument, but as lullaby, sung softly into sleep. Night deepens. The fire of persecution is long faded, the roads of exile stretch empty, and the small gestures of the underground church hum quietly in corners of life. The story has carried us through caverns beneath Jerusalem, through cathedrals of stone and song, through the whispers of Rome and the pyres of kings. Now we arrive at stillness. The embers dim, the bells toll faintly across the fields, the mist curls low among the roots of the deep forest, and within that stillness lies the last symbol, the last echo, the bell beneath the stone. Fact offers us this. Places remember. Archaeologists tell us that sites of devotion carry memory in layers of soil, in wear upon steps, in traces of hands left on thresholds. The Temple Mount, where the 9 nights once vanished into silence, still bears scars of their residents, foundations that speak of reuse, of quarters once occupied by men who dug by torchlight. Chartres still holds its labyrinth, Tomar its circle, Paris its ghost. Even in absence, presence lingers, pilgrims walk, scholars dig, bells toll above places where memory hides below. Quirky traditions endure in unexpected corners. In a small French hamlet once tied to a Templar commandery, villagers leave pine cones on the doorstep of the old chapel every spring. No one remembers why. Some say it honors fertility, others that it pleases the forest. But one elderly villager once whispered to an ethnographer that it was a knight's custom, that pine cones held the spiral of the covenant, the geometry of life itself. Perhaps true, perhaps invention, but each year the cones return, tokens laid gently upon worn stone, a ritual without scripture, only persistence. The debated point that lingers into this final silence is whether the covenant ever truly existed as a single coherent secret, or whether it was always fragments, scattered echoes, bound together only by human yearning. Some argue the Templars found scrolls, relics, proportions beneath Jerusalem. Others insist nothing tangible was ever there, that the covenant was an invention born of imagination and rumor. And yet across centuries, people still whisper, still believe, still listen for bells in the mist. Perhaps the covenant was never an object but a posture, the willingness to keep silence, to believe that beneath stone there is always something more. Close your eyes and breathe slowly. Picture the knights once more, not in battle, not in trial, but in quiet descent beneath the Temple Mount. Their torches flicker, steel set aside, hands dusty from stone. One strikes a wall and the echo sounds like a bell, low, resonant, lingering in air long after the strike has ended. They pause. The sound fades, but in fading it becomes memory, a bell beneath stone. That sound, more than any scroll, becomes the covenant. It is not written, not seen, only heard and remembered. Through centuries, the bell tolls faintly in echoes. It rings in the arches of cathedrals, in the round walls of Tomar, in the labyrinth walked barefoot by pilgrims. It rings in the silence of dungeons where shackled men close their eyes at vesper. It rings in forests where nameless riders pass, in villages where bakers score loaves in spirals, always faint, always elusive, but always there. The bell beneath the stone tolls not in bronze but in memory, not in sound but in silence. Now let us drift deeper into mist and forest. Picture the deep woods at night, branches heavy with dew, the air cool, the path uncertain. A rider moves slowly, cloak drawn close, his horse's breath rising like smoke. No mantle, no cross, no banner, only silence and the faint impression of bells carried in his memory. He rides without name, yet the road carries him. He disappears into the forest, and the forest closes its mist, swallowing him. Yet the impression remains as though we have heard a bell toll faintly beneath the leaves. The symbols gather here at the end. Steel, once sharp, has cooled, resting in earth. Bells, once bright, now toll faintly, half memory, half dream. Mist curls low, covering what history cannot explain. The deep forest stands timeless, sheltering secrets in its roots. Together they form a lullaby, a motif of endings where history dissolves into dream. And what of us, listening in the quiet of night? We are heirs, not of relics, not of scrolls, but of resonance. We carry the echo in our breath when we pause, in our silence when we reflect, in our curiosity when we wonder. Perhaps that is the true covenant, not knowledge hidden beneath stone, but the human need to keep asking, to keep listening, to believe that silence conceals meaning worth guarding. Close your eyes once more, hear the faint bell, low and steady, tolling beneath stone. It does not wake, it soothes. It does not command, it comforts. It tells us that even in endings there is continuity, even in silence there is song. The Templars have passed, their names scattered, their order broken. Yet the bell tolls still, not for power, not for kings, but for those who listen in the night. The mist thickens, the forest deepens, the rhythm of breath slows. The story has carried us across centuries, through light and shadow, through certainty and debate. Now it settles, soft as pine needles, cool as stone at dusk. The covenant without a name fades gently, like the toll of a bell diminishing into silence. If these bells in the mist have watched over your rest, you may, only if you wish, touch, like, subscribe to Serene Myths, or leave the quiet place and hour that holds you now. Good night then. Good night to steel that has cooled, to bells that have tolled, to mist that has hidden, to the deep forest that holds it all. Good night to nights who vanished, to vows that split, to covenants without name. The bell beneath the stone tolls once more, then rests. And in that rest, you too may drift softly into sleep.